When you think of the most powerful person in the United States, chances are your mind goes to the president. And though that role is one of power, it doesn't necessarily mean the person who holds it is filthy rich. Since 2001, the president's annual salary is $400,000 per year, not counting their $50,000 expense account, $100,000 travel expense account, and $19,000 entertainment account. That being said, $400,000 per year is a lot of money, but there are some presidents who are worth 10 times that. Presidents who owned mansions, plantations, first edition books, and dare I say, casinos. Today, we're going to take a look at the richest presidents in American history. We'll see exactly how they made their money, what they achieved during their presidency, and what they spent their wealth on. Buckle up, because you may be surprised to know some of the United States presidents were a bit on the wild side. Number 5. Andrew Jackson. The 5th wealthiest president in American history is none other than the 7th president of the United States, Andrew Jackson. His wealth is estimated to have been approximately $132 million. And that's not the most shocking fact about this wild man that somehow became president. You can pick from a list of unbelievable facts: that he beat the snot out of his own would-be assassin, that he kept a giant wheel of cheese in the center of the White House for 2 years, that he participated in somewhere between 20 and 100 duels in his lifetime, and that's just a few snippets of his life. But how did a man who was, by all accounts, a bit eccentric manage to accumulate a fortune worth $132 million at a time when our nation was struggling? To answer that question, we've got to go back quite a ways to an impoverished part of our nation that would one day become Tennessee. Jackson was born into poverty, unlike most of the presidents on this list. The Revolutionary War started when he was just a boy, and at the age of 13, he joined a local militia as a courier. At 14, he was captured by the Redcoats and taken as a prisoner of war. There, he stood his ground and was left with a permanent scar after he refused to polish a Redcoat's boots. He was released, but unfortunately, his mother and brother passed soon after. He was left an orphan and began studying law to make his way in the world. You might want to keep that occupation in mind, because pretty much every president on this list had the same idea. He became a prosecuting attorney and made the big bucks. For quite some time, he lived in a log cabin, with additional log cabins serving as slave quarters. However, as his wealth grew, so did his home. With his slaves working as brick makers, Jackson created Hermitage Plantation. The home was a mansion in its time, consisting of 8 rooms, all of which had fireplaces and chimneys. The home was lavish, with imported wallpaper, a mahogany staircase, crystal chandeliers, and marble mantels. Over the course of his life, the home was constantly improved to be more modern and more luxurious. With all his success, Jackson was appointed as Tennessee's first representative in the House of Representatives. He moved on to become a senator, but quickly resigned. After that, he was appointed a major general in the War of 1812. He led troops in the Battle of Horseshoe Bend and the Battle of New Orleans, earning him respect and admiration. He then fought in the First Seminole War and went on to rejoin the Senate, then run for president in 1828, which he won by a landslide. To celebrate his victory, Jackson did a pretty unpresidential thing. He threw a massive rager. The party at the White House was estimated to have 20,000 people in attendance, and it quickly got out of hand. Plates were smashed by smashed people. Jackson hid from the crowd, and people were spilling whiskey-laced punch on the White House furniture. I mean, with a start like that, it's no wonder the man had a turbulent presidency. His opponents called him Jackass, which led him to using a donkey to represent himself. And that symbol still stands as the symbol of the Democratic Party to this very day. But in terms of things Jackson did, well, there's good and bad. He shut down the second bank of the United States. He was the first president to veto bills, and he was the president behind the Trail of Tears, the forced migration of thousands of Cherokee natives. Through his presidency, Jackson was known for spending his wealth as he pleased. This included lots and lots of whiskey, imported foods, and furniture, and frequent renovations of his expensive home. Number 4. Teddy Roosevelt. Coming in at number 4 on our list puts us a few years past Jackson. Theodore Roosevelt, or Teddy as his family called him, was a man of surprising amassing wealth. How much exactly? $139 million. And unlike Jackson, Teddy was born into it. He came from a family that had long lived in America and found wealth in every industry you can imagine. His parents were the owners of a plate glass business and had a nice brownstone in New York. Teddy grew up traveling in Europe and Egypt, with frequent hiking trips into the Alps. Though as a child, he was often bedridden due to severe asthma. Teddy went on to study, you guessed it, law at Columbia Law School. However, after his father passed, leaving Teddy and his siblings a $3.3 million fortune, Teddy dropped out of school, instead choosing to go into politics. He joined the New York State Assembly, becoming the youngest person ever to serve in that position. Unfortunately, his wife and mother both passed away on Valentine's Day, soon after he took the role. In his grief, he left his position and New York, instead moving out to the Dakota Territory, where he became a rancher. But bad luck wasn't finished with him yet. He bounced between New York and the Dakotas, though eventually his entire herd was wiped out during a particularly hard winter. He went on to serve as Civil Service Commissioner, a police commissioner, and the Assistant United States Navy Secretary. Teddy also ran for mayor of New York, but took third place. During the Spanish-American War, Teddy led the Rough Riders, the first U.S. volunteer cavalry regiment. After his widely publicized service, he again ran for mayor, and this time he won. The next step was president, but his ideas were deemed too progressive for his own party. He became the vice president to McKinley, and after McKinley's assassination, he stepped up as the youngest United States president. During his presidential term, he helped negotiate the end of the Russo-Japanese War and served as the first environmentalist, signing the National Monuments Act. Throughout all of this, Teddy never had to worry about money. The $3.3 million inheritance served him well as the salaries from the numerous positions he held. In addition, he wrote over 25 books, many of which were top sellers. So, what did he do with all that money? Mainly, the man traveled, bought cattle, and bought property. At only the age of 22, he bought prime property on Long Island that would become his own estate. The 22-room home was full of luxury, including a bathroom with a porcelain tub and a water closet, which was almost unheard of at the time. Number 3. Thomas Jefferson. If you took any United States history class or, watched Hamilton, then you know who Thomas Jefferson was. What you probably didn't know is that good old TJ had an estimated net worth of $236.8 million. That being said, Jefferson is perhaps one of the least financially savvy presidents of all time. At the time of his death, he was deeply, deeply in debt. So much so that he tried to hold a lottery for Monticello, his beloved estate. So much so that he sold his book collection to the government, which would form the beginning of what would one day become the Library of Congress. However, all of that couldn't keep Jefferson from his one true love, spending money. Deeply in debt, one of the last letters he ever sent was a letter requesting a case of expensive French wine. And it's easy to see why Jefferson had such a hard time letting go of the finer things. He had had them at his fingertips his entire life. Jefferson was born into a prominent family in Virginia. He received an amazing education, went to the prestigious William and Mary College, and went on to become a lawyer. After studying for 5 years, he was one of the most educated lawyers in the nation at the time, and that meant he was one of the best paid. In his early days as a lawyer, he began construction on Monticello, and that construction would really never stop. Throughout his life, Jefferson constantly updated Monticello and expanded it to be as luxurious as possible. He poured millions of dollars into the estate, and trust me, it shows. At the time, it was the most expensive home in America. The plantation was home to dozens of outbuildings, as well as fine furnishings, fireplaces in every room, of course, and a massive library. The property was also home to 130 slaves, including Sally Hemings, a slave who fathered 6 of Jefferson's children. Throughout his time living at Monticello, Jefferson traveled frequently. He was an early supporter of U.S. independence, which led to him being picked to draft the Declaration of Independence. He drafted it in just 17 days. After this, he became Virginia's second governor, serving 2 terms where he wasn't incredibly well liked. He then served as the United States minister in France for 5 years. After returning, he was appointed Secretary of State by none other than George Washington. After clashing with Hamilton and others during his time as Secretary of State, Jefferson attempted yet again to leave politics. But unlucky for him, he was chosen and elected vice president, and in 1800, he became the President of the United States. During his presidency, Jefferson liked to spend big, and that included the Louisiana Purchase. In his private life, Jefferson not only spent his money on Monticello and books, but copious amounts of wine. It's estimated that he spent $1 million per year on expensive wine, so it's no wonder that the man died with a fair share of debt. Number 2. George Washington. You know him. You see him on your $1 bill every day. The runner-up for the most wealthy president is George Washington. He may not be number 1 on the list, but he was the first president, so he is number 1 somewhere. It's estimated that Washington had a net worth of $587 million, and at a time where the United States could hardly afford to clothe their soldiers, that's pretty impressive. Washington is another example of a president who lived in wealth his entire life. He was born to a wealth planter in colonial Virginia. Little is known about his early years, but it is known that his mentor and half-brother, Lawrence Washington, left him Mount Vernon when he passed. The 2,000-acre farm was much more than most Americans had, and over time, Washington would expand it. After earning the property and growing into adulthood, Washington joined the French and Indian War, where he was first a commander and then went on to be in charge of the entire military. After his success, he served as a delegate to the First Continental Congress and rightfully took on the role as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army during the Revolutionary War. And that was not an easy war to fight in. I'm talking the scrappy nerd on the playground going up against the rich buff kid that's a year older. The revolutionaries lost nearly every fight. They had little to no training, not enough equipment, and poor clothes. Yet, they managed to hold their ground fight after fight after fight. Under Washington's control, they finally found victory after 8 long years. As the war ended and the scramble to form a new nation began, it was decided that Washington was the best choice to become the leader of the United States. He took on the role in 1789 and got to work making something from basically nothing. He established the first U.S. cabinet, copyright laws, and began dozens of traditions including Thanksgiving. During his presidency, his salary was $25,000, which was 2% of the total United States budget at the time. After stepping down from his presidency, Washington returned to Mount Vernon, and that's precisely where Washington had made most of his money over the years, in addition to the 50,000 acres of land that he owned. He ran the most profitable distillery in America out of Mount Vernon, which is something they probably didn't teach you in history class. Yearly, the distillery produced over 11,000 gallons. Mount Vernon itself was an impressive establishment, and you didn't have to hit up the distillery first to see it. The plantation consisted of the mansion, as well as 50 outbuildings. In the mansion, many of the rooms have painted paneling and ornamental architecture in a neoclassical style. There are rooms of opulence, such as the New Room, which is a 2-story room featuring marble work, a Palladian window, and an impressive chimney. Some of the outbuildings include a salt room, smokehouse, wash house, laundry yard, storehouse, clerk's quarters, and an ice house. There's also dozens of beautiful gardens and orchards that line the property as well. Quite the place for old George to kick back and relax. Number 1. Donald Trump. If you lived through the 80s and 90s, there should be no doubt in your mind who the most wealthy president of all time is. You saw him flying in helicopters, gloating on TV. I mean, you saw his name on everything from vodka to casinos to a slab of steak. Donald Trump is the wealthiest president of all time, with a net worth of $2.1 billion, nearly 4 times as much wealth as George Washington. The average person in the United States will only make about $1 million in their lifetime, meaning Trump has the net worth equivalent of what 1,823 people will make in their entire working career. How does someone acquire that much wealth? Well, like many of the people on this list, they're born into it and invest that fortune. Trump's wealth goes way back to the 1920s. His father made his fortune in real estate and housing, becoming one of the most profitable businesses in the United States. By the time Donald Trump was born and turned 3, his father had created a trust where Trump earned $60,600 per year. By the time Trump was 22, however, his father's business was struggling. Trump took a front seat of the business, eventually becoming its president and earning $260,000 per year in salary. He went on to build Prospect Tower, a building which earned him $300,000 per year in just shares and management fees alone. Not a bad way to earn cash, if you ask me. By 1976, just 5 years after Trump became the company's leader, his net worth was listed at $200 million. Around this time is when Trump decided to rebrand the company, turning to the maximalist, opulent, gold and marble-plated aesthetic that we know it for today. Using aggressive business tactics, Trump managed to rise to the top, creating some of the most luxurious buildings in New York. His reputation for being a ruthless negotiator made the media love him, and he was often on the cover of magazines and on TV, a little bit different than other presidents on this list. He continued in real estate, struggling, then succeeding, then struggling again, then succeeding again, and in between, starring on shows like The Apprentice, buying shares in Miss Universe, and starting modeling companies. Throughout all of this, Trump has lived a life of luxury. He has his own Monticello and his own Mount Vernon, plus more. He has 3 homes near Mar-a-Lago, valued at $25 million, a home in Beverly Hills worth $13.5 million, a home in St. Martin worth $13 million, the penthouse in Trump Tower worth $54 million, and an estate in Bedford, New York worth another $24 million, which includes 213 acres of rolling hills and an indoor pool encased in imported marble. In addition, he doesn't have to get around in a carriage like the other presidents on this list. He has a fleet of planes and helicopters, including a Boeing 727 worth $100 million. Then there are the cars, of course, which included several Ferraris, a Maybach, and a Rolls-Royce Phantom that costs approximately $500,000 alone. So, there you have it, the wealthiest presidents in United States history. What do you guys think? Should I have a go and run for president of the United States so I can join this list one day? Let me know in the comments down below. As always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications. Oh, and maybe check me out on Instagram. As always, thanks for tuning in. I'm Mr. Luxury. Pip pip to doodly doo.